Hey guys, how you doing? A little different this time. We're in this space. This is my music studio space, my project studio space. It's where I work. Why here? Because a lot of production stuff has come to mind recently. It started, I was doing some experimenting in here, recording instruments and dealing with microphones. And so I was going in a particular direction. And then I saw something great online by Greg Savage. Greg Savage, you can find on Instagram and on Threads as DIY Music. He's a composer, a lot of game stuff, and tons of sync licensing things. And that's a world I'm increasingly interested in because been writing pieces for that, and I'm going to start. That's how my 24 gets started. I'm going to be talking to all sorts of sync licensing companies and submitting music and getting in touch with them and beginning that process. It's something I want to get into, but I don't know Greg personally. We've interacted online, but I just think he's a very, very, very bright guy. And he said something the other day that I thought it just spurred all sorts of thoughts. I guess it was supposed to. He's a thought-provoking dude. I think and I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of what he was saying was that, when he first got started in production, that the idea of trust your ears seemed like really good, sound, solid advice, right? You had all this, you'd spent your life listening to music, you had a sense of taste, you knew what you wanted to hear, you had an inner idea, an idealized sound that you wanted to do, and now that sounded like a good starting point to approach music production. And that's true. But as you get deeper into it, there's so much stuff in there. Meaning there is compressors and EQ and delays and so many ways, reverb, and so many ways to change the timbre of a sound, to really deal with more audiophile quality of the sound, not so much musical stuff as more audiophile stuff. And so much control over that. And you could get lost in that very easily. But also that there's a lot to learn all about that. There's a tremendous learning curve, and it's something to be respected. And that there is, if you're a musician and you come to this and you bring all of that knowledge with you, which is great, but there is a daylight. It doesn't just overlay on top of music production, and now music production will somehow obey all of your musical knowledge. It doesn't work perfectly. They are different disciplines. If you've only come to this, so in other words, if you're a musician, you've decided you're going to become a producer, you've got a lot to learn. You got a lot to learn about all of this. Okay? If you always came from here, and really weren't that much of a player, again, the blinders could be on. There are things, they're just going to be holes in your knowledge. So good producers, I think, are always trying to learn, but they're usually played. They're always trying to learn more about idiomatic things about the instruments they're recording so that they can make sure that they do it right, so those instruments sound as good as they can, right? But there is this difference. And as you become a producer, you have to learn to switch those hats. You can't always think, if you have a musician background, you can't suddenly be convinced that that's enough here. Here, there's another world, and you're going to have to be part of that world too. I just thought it was a great point, but it really got me thinking about all sorts of things. I was thinking about recording at home and the advice that you get. The advice that you often get about recording at home is, you'll get a lot of this. Folks who have either project studios or in larger studios, and they're trying to be helpful. I'm not saying these are bad folks. They're trying to let you know that here are best practices. And if it's on Instagram or something like that, it's going to be a minute or so where they're going to show you, you know, the best practices. And look, yes, dB levels and, you know, things that you want to do to make things sound as good as you can. And there are some, you know, again, there are best practices, but what they never seem to talk about, and I think it's a mistake, is when they're talking about using a mic per se, is the vagaries of the space in which it is being recorded. Every space may sound different, and your microphone may react different. You know, most mics, they'll all say they're the greatest thing of all time, but they were tested and so forth. But they were tested in really good facilities, and I'm sure they're excellent. But are they going to be excellent for you? Are they going to be excellent for you in your space? All right? Look, let me approach this problem. I'll give you a couple ideas. I'm a trumpet player. I play jazz. I went to Berkeley as a young guy to go learn about jazz, man. And I played a lot of jazz gigs. And I had my own group, and we were playing in Bleecker Street in the city, and, played gigs and did commercial gigs and did also. That's fun. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff, knowledge of just playing that instrument, all right? But I had to learn a whole other world when I decided I was going to come in here. Now, this year I got to record on, I think I did I was a sideman on 3 records. So I still get to record and play parts and have fun as a player. That's still a huge part of my life. And I'm still always practicing, and I'm always still trying to get better. I guess you always do, right? It's a lifelong process. But that's becoming a producer has expanded things. And one of the first things I had to learn was I'm in an alcove, basically, in the basement of my house. My house is on a hill. So although it's the basement, there are windows looking out onto the side. In fact, there's a window right back here, and that window looks out to, I don't know if you can see it, but it's snowing a little bit this afternoon, so it's pretty out there, and it's a light snow. It's been light snow all day. But it was a good little space to work in. I could fit the desk and everything in here. And I was trying to figure out, okay, do I close off this room? And do I soundproof the room? Well, I'm in the middle of nowhere, really. My neighbors aren't really going to hear me. So I don't have a soundproofing issue. And I got a hold of acoustic people. And I mean this like hat in hand. Because now we're in a realm I don't know. I could tell from my ears what a good acoustical space is. But what am I even trying to do here? What should my goals even be? I needed advice. And I got a hold of an acoustics expert. I'm in southern New York. This guy was in Connecticut. He came by. And he said, oh, this isn't bad at all. I said, okay. And he said, I said, do I want to close this off, because there's walls on 3 sides. And behind what is essentially you is an open space, okay? And he said, no, don't close this off. He goes, let's get as much of that out of here as possible. What he was talking about was like first reflections. And he said, look, we can't make your space perfect, but that's not our intention. I said, okay. He said, the intention is to get it to sound perfectly in one place, where your head is. Literally, the space, a square, right, in 3-dimensional space around your head, where a speaker, and there's another speaker, it's opposite on the other side, are triangulating and hitting my head, essentially. If I am here, sound is coming to me. I'm at my desk. I want the sound there to be perfect. How do we do that? Well, there's bass trap above my head. There is a bass trap right to my side and to the other side. And there is another one behind me from where I sit it here. And the idea of that is to pick off first reflections. And he said, that's a good start. Do that. Okay. And the only way, well, how do you know if it's working, right? How do you tell that that setup works? Well, it turned out it did work. And the way there was an acid test. And it was, frankly, a big freaking deal and a definite an achievement, if not, it really was. Because if I get a mix here, and then I play it in my car, or play it on commercial equipment, or play it anywhere, it sounds the same. Right? The thing we don't want, right, is to come up with something that we think sounds great. We play it somewhere else and it sounds nothing like what it sounded at home. Which means the setup at home, what you're hearing isn't reflective of what's really going on. There is this incredible distance. What we want is for it to sound here. What we hear here is the same that we'll hear everywhere else. If you've done that, you have sound conditioned your space appropriately. Whew, well, that's a big deal because it's a must. You've got to know that what you're hearing is what you will be hearing and what everyone else will be hearing. Big deal. So I think that's the first thing to want to achieve. Fine. And one of the wonderful things is a lot of what, we're limited. These project studios are limited, right? You don't have the great spaces that the great recording studios have. So you're much more confined by what you can do. But within that area, if you stay within those lines of what project studios do well, you can do a lot. And people do. Tons of stuff that you're hearing, television and everywhere, is being recorded in spaces not all that dissimilar to mine. Some better and some worse. So it can be done. But most of it's being done, right? Not in a monitor, but in the computer world, in the computer space. Because you've got plugins and you're able to do everything. You don't necessarily have to record all that much. You might record a vocal. Or in my case, not for TV things so much, but for things that I might want to do. I am still a trumpet player. I might still want to record my horn. Okay. Now let's get into that a little bit. All right? You can play all sorts of microphones and use all sorts of microphones. Here's an SM57, right? One of the most standard mics known to man. Good for horns live. This was my live horn when I was using that for that. What else have I got here? I've got a couple for you. I've got an old condenser, a more recent condenser. I have one of, be very careful with this one of Michael Barclay's spectacular ribbon microphones. Again, very careful with mic stuff. And you know what? They're all great. But they go about their business a little differently. They might give you a little more of this, a little more of that. Okay. But I think the biggest factor, there are two enormous factors in this, is where the heck is it in the room? They're all fine. They're all excellent. Where's it going to be placed in the room? How does that spot sound? And you need to experiment with that. And that's the thing that, if you see you get these videos on Instagram and someone's going to tell you, these are the best practices, this is what to do, and if you just do blank, 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 everything will sound great. They're not lying to you. They're not bad people. But what they can't tell you, and I think is the most important part of it, is you're an experiment of one. How does your room sound? And again, you have ears and you have an idealized sound as to what it's supposed to sound like. What's the closest you can get to that sound, right? Before you do anything to it. What's the best signal you can get to start with that requires doing less to it? Because the less you do to it, probably the better. Move that mic. Look, I'm a horn player. Right? If I play this horn am I playing it right into a mic? Or am I offset? That'll give me a whole different sound. Which mic? Where is the mic placed? Where am I placed? And this trumpet isn't going to sound like this trumpet, which is totally different setup, has a much more darker, mellower sound. Totally different instrument. What if I'm playing this puppy? It's a flugelhorn, softer, does all of these differences, all of those differences, the differences in the mics, differences in the instruments. Where is the mic in the room? This condenser microphone, right? What if I turn it around or turn it backwards or turn it sideways? Will I get a different sound then? Yup. Ooh. Maybe that's something I want to go for. What's it sound like in different places in the room? There's so much you could do. There's so much. So you need to experiment with that. Yes, there's best practices. This isn't a homework assignment. This isn't a problem. This is great news. This is fun. This is how you get to do what producers do. Play with timbre, play with sound to get the best one. But don't be like, okay, there is a rigid way that this must be done, and this is the only way in which you can do it. Not true. There's a million ways to take care of it and do it. So I wouldn't see that as a problem. See it as an opportunity, because you will find, but again, your room is your room. Only your room is going to sound like your room. You're not trying to, it's not about, yes, there are standards that we have ideas, and we have ideas in our head as to what the sound's supposed to be, but you get to do this. You get to find that. Don't feel constrained. Don't feel, well, I'm insecure about it, so I've got to follow and I've got to do the checklist. No, you don't. Start to play with all these variables, play with them, and you'll find it and go, there it is, now I know. And once you do find what is that works, I would probably write it down so that you can recreate this whenever you want. And you're going to find all sorts of different things and different sounds that sound better and worse for different instruments. It's great. Again, this is not a problem. But it reminded me of, to some degree, what Greg Savage was saying. There's this whole other world, but don't feel like it's, I'm lost now and I don't know no. Embrace it, but recognize these differences. And you don't have to be an unbelievable record producer or music producer rather to do all this stuff. I think half the battle is being willing to make those experiments and dive in and get these different sounds. It's cool. It's all right. It's all right. Let's go into, now I want to hit you up with one other idea that occurred to me, and it was really helpful. It's fun sometimes when you learn something about music, not from music, but from some other discipline, and you realize how much it applies to music. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. I started to learn what Greg was talking about playing with the toys, from an entirely different area. I got into, I lived in New York City for a long time, but then I moved, I'm about an hour or so, hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15, north of the city, and I'm in the woods up here. And so I get back to the city a lot. It's great. But I started to realize that certain parts of the night sky, the part of the night sky that wasn't pointing towards Manhattan, where there's a glow. But if you're looking into large parts of the night sky, the stars were incredible. And I'd always had an interest in, first of all, just having a telescope and looking at these things. But that, like anything else, that only takes you so far. And then you go, I want to really see the stuff, it turns out you need to take pictures of it. Okay, so I started to get into astrophotography, meaning you've got to have a telescope. It's going to be able to track the stars. You need additional equipment to absolutely zero in so that there's no drift in the field of view. You lock in on something. You'll be able to attach some kind of camera. And these cameras take a series, whatever object you're looking at, not solar system objects, but I mean, nebula and, deep space stuff. And people take these photos. I always want to see that stuff. And catch a galaxy, I want to see that. I want to take my own picture. It's not enough to see it in the magazine. I want to see it myself. And if I can't see it with my eye, which you only then I'll use the camera, and I want to get my own view of it. I want to do it myself. So what I realized is, to get the photo, they don't take a photo. They take 30 photos, they take 40 photos, 2-minute exposures, 5-minute exposures. Spend a lot of time taking the photos. Then software takes all those photos and puts them into one image. And you need to do that just so that you can see the thing, because the distances involved, right? And what we're talking about is so far away that even then, you could just barely see the thing because you're talking about something that's, 800 light years away or more. Unbelievable distances. Somehow we're catching those photons and we're able to see it. But you're only able to see it when you have all of these photos stacked into one image. And even then, you're not done. Then you need to turn up all the light portions so, there it is. But now the background looks gray. So there's all this processing that you have to do to the image, okay? To essentially, you're reverse engineering it. You're not trying to turn it into a cartoon, right? You're trying to see the thing. But in order to see the thing, you have to make the blacks much blacker and turn up the light and turn up the color level, because there is color there. You're not inventing anything. You're not changing it. It's all there embedded in the data of the image. It's there. You just have to be able to bring it out so that you can see it as if you were way out in outer space, you were close enough to this thing and you could look at it. All right? That's essentially what you're doing. But nobody ever sees that. The greatest telescopes in the world don't see the image that you see the photograph of. It takes photographing it and then darkening the dark, lightening the light, and then you see it. You're not inventing anything. It's there. Now, people can overprocess and you use the devices too strongly, and then it starts to look weird and it doesn't look real anymore. Right, they've overdone it. But nobody, if you're being scientific-y about it, science-y about it, right, you're trying to see the thing. You're not trying to change the thing. You're not artistically changing the thing. No, you just want to see it. But it requires all this work just to get to what your eye would see if you could be close enough to see it. Okay? That's a lot of what we do here. If I record one of my horns, it usually doesn't, it almost never does. Same with most of these things. They don't sound exactly like they actually sound. Microphones are not perfect machines that take in the sound perfectly any more than a camera is. Right? Photographers have to, again, not trying to turn it into a cartoon. You can go that way, okay. But if you're just trying to make the image what our eyes see, the camera isn't perfect. It needs help to get us to see what our eyes see. We do the same thing. It needs some help to sound like what it is we're supposed to, because it will not pick it up perfectly. It does need help. Trumpets in particular, I record a trumpet, you have to be able to work, the high end is going to be very high, could be a little shrill, because microphones pick up those frequencies very strongly, and so you have to adjust some of that. There's not as much low stuff, you take the low stuff. There's a whole way to EQ trumpets, which people know. And it's helpful because then when you're done with it, you go, oh, that's what it actually sounds like. But you had to use the machine, again, not to make, look, if you can use the equipment to turn it into something fake. Let's assume you're not trying to do that, right? Let's assume you're just trying to get an accurate sound. It's going to take some work to make it be that thing. So in that sense, the astrophotography thing really turned me on to that. And you sit there and go, wait a minute. You're not changing it. You're not faking it. You're just trying to make it so that it's accurate. And I think that's not the only thing we do here with acoustic instruments, but it can be. Most of the time, I think very often is. We're just trying to get that sound out. That was one thing. So there's a sort of a nutsy and boltsy thing. And it made me much more relaxed about making changes to what you record, because instead of being something like, oh, it wasn't perfect. Well, this isn't a live gig. This is sampling sounds to make them sound the way we ideally want them to sound. So if you play the part accurately and well, okay, now we just need to give it a little bit of that. And virtually every recording you will hear of anybody playing virtually anything on the trumpet gets a little bit of EQ help, space help, whatever it is, to make the instrument sound like the instrument, because microphones do not perfectly record reality. That was a big history of the music studio before multi-tracking and definitely after multi-tracking. Huge part of it. Then there's another one that hit me. This is more artistic. I heard a statement by a historian the other day, and I loved this, where a student was questioning why we pay such attention to ancient history. Is it really that important? Historian had a great answer. He said, his criticism of the student was, look, you're looking at this on very one-dimensionally, from a surface level, saying, okay, we're learning dates and people and things that happened. And that's okay. I guess it's interesting at some level to know what happened, so we know. But we learn the real utility of history is we learn history, yes, to learn about the past, but really it explains the present. It explains now. Because there is nothing human beings have done, in the last 5,000 years of recorded history that they haven't done before. There's nothing new under the sun. There isn't, right? It's all been done before. Now, it may manifest itself differently. There are newer inventions. Oh, the stuff we're dealing with is different all the time. Oh, sure, lots of different stuff. Lots of different circumstances, perhaps. But human beings themselves, as thinking, quasi-moral, often not, creatures, they've never been any different. They wrestle with the same problems and very often came up with the same solutions and same answers. And very often make the same mistakes again and again and again and again. So, one of the reasons we learn history is it explains exactly what's going on now, because we're not doing anything all that differently. Our circumstances may be different. Our cultures may have changed and have different values. And okay, but what human beings essentially are, no difference. No difference. So history isn't just the past. It's an explainer of the present. The present's much more understandable. It's not there to be a hassle. It's there to help you You've got to decide whether, gee, should I be ignorant, or maybe I could actually know something. It's amazing that that's what we're in that kind of place culturally. We don't know what to do. We don't know. Gee, I don't know. Maybe being stupid's the answer. Yeah, we're lost in the wilderness. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, but not just world history. Whoever's history you want to check out. No? Let's relate this to us. What about our history? What about musical history? What about art history? Have we done anything different? Is there anything new under the sun? I'll say no. And let me throw you, look, there are a lot of ways if you want to start talking about the history of music, right? Whose music? What culture? Yes, if you deal with, depending on which part of the world you want to concentrate on, if you start going into India, for instance, and you start realizing that the harmonic thing is extremely complex, and the bending of notes and all of these things, they're in a whole other place, and there's a lot to learn about that, and it's really cool. And there is an emphasis on that. The melodies are very interesting too. They have a very strongly developed melodic sense. Okay, if you deal with fascinating thing about it, a lot of African music is the strong rhythmic thing, but the rhythmic thing being also connected to dance, but there being almost no difference between dance and drumming. It's all kind of one, so it's a whole other way of appreciating things. Okay, also really, really cool. And there's all this different stuff. However, I'm going to concentrate on, just because I have a greater knowledge of it, and I live in a sort of a country that's more informed by Western European history and that history of music, so I could speak better on it. I'm just going to concentrate on that, with the proviso that all these other things are definitely worth checking out and have equal status, no doubt about it. But one of the things you could say about Western music from the Middle Ages to, say, the early 20th century is there was a constantly more notes were being added. The harmonic palette was getting wider. More things were legal. From medieval music, pretty staid, and then the Baroque, and all sorts of things are going on in classical music, and then romantic music. We're getting to the 19th century, we're expanding the harmonic palette wider, more notes, more density, more things going on with chords, all this stuff, more and more and more, and you get into the early 20th century, and you run out. You get to Schoenberg and Berg and Webern, and it's 12 tones, and there aren't any more notes, guys. There ain't any more notes. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's from here to there. That space. That's it. Everything else is octaves, right? The same notes. It's a language with 12 notes. All right, I think of it as you're on a football field and you've driven down to the 1 foot line. You've only got one more foot for a touchdown, right? And you've done 99 and 2/3 yards. You're great. You're going to plow into the end zone because you think there's more after that. And what if you plow in the end zone, and as you get to the line of the end zone, it's a force field, and bang, you can't go any further. That's classical music in 1910, 12, 13, 14. It's done. There ain't any more. Look at that music for the rest of the 20th century. They didn't know what to do. They tried to sell it to people. No one wanted to go. You want to make sure no one goes to a concert? Start having a Webern and Berg and concert. You'll 3 guys will show up. I mean, it's that people didn't want to hear that. So now directions that borrow neoclassicism, and we're gonna borrow some stuff, and it's spent a century trying to figure out what to do, and basically there isn't anything left to do. And this is analogous. Jazz had the same thing happen from 1920 to 1960. They were on a they were on the Express version of this. But you went from Louis Armstrong to Ornette Coleman, right? From a tonal and polyphony to, atonal and okay. And then jazz didn't know what to do after that either, and eventually went into fusion and okay. And now most of what you got today is people trying to do impressions of the stuff that came before them, and to become a music of craftsmanship instead of a music of artistry, because there's nothing, they ran out of notes. To a degree, I think you can find this very analogous to fashion. Has fashion created, right, is the human body hasn't changed, right? We haven't got like suddenly new arms growing out. Well, they had to invent a new shirt and new pants for those extra legs that were now growing. Oh, there's no. So what does fashion do? Fashion looks back at itself, knows its history, is that word again, and reinterprets its history to see how people in this day and age will react to something that maybe they've forgotten existed. Because it's not really new. And that works. And I would say to you that's a lot of what is going on in the musical world these days. I don't dislike Taylor Swift. I really don't. I think she's a bright person. But there isn't anything she's doing that hasn't been done before. It's just that the people hearing it weren't introduced to the stuff in the first place. Look, if you've never listened to Joni Mitchell or Johnny Cash, or if you've never listened to any of the music that informs her, then when you hear her, wow, it's a revelation. If you listen to Wynton Marsalis, right, and you don't know the history of jazz, you're pretty blown away. And he's an amazing musician, and I'm not knocking Taylor Swift, but there's nothing really new there. There may be some ideas about form that are new, but I think there's nothing necessarily also wrong with simply admitting that that is the fact. And that take that history and try to mix things up in a different way. That might be new. There might be a different way to make these previously existing things bounce off the culture differently and get a different reaction from people. There's some ground to cover. There's an area to go to. But the nuts and bolts of it, 12 notes is still the 12 notes. Okay? So, there's a reason people aren't all that excited about the current hip hop or the current pop or the current classical music or the current jazz. It doesn't hit anybody because they've become craftspeople. And I don't think there's a lot of art going on. I think there's a lot of craftsmanship, an amazing amount of craftsmanship, but at the expense of the artistry. I would prefer, and I can't believe I'm saying this because you spend your whole life trying to be the best musician you can be, but I would prefer almost more amateurism, people going for something that they believe in and doing that. That would probably balance things out a little better. Still needs to be produced right and done right and so forth, but go for something that means something to you. Mix some of those styles. Knowing your history, you can more likely do that. Learn all this stuff, learn it all. But all of these things can come together to try to come up with something that's new. And no, the big corporations don't want to hear it. And, we're not making art for those people anyhow. They're just out to make a buck. Hey, listen, I like to make a buck too. But I have a couple on my desktop. There are two folders. Actually, you know what? It's in here. If I go into here, naturally, of course, it will not show me these two things. Let's see, maybe it's in. Yeah, here it is. One of them says for me, and the other one says for them. So it's not on my desktop, but there are two file folders, for me and for them. This is stuff I'm doing because I got to do it. I'm not worrying about selling it. I'm just worrying about doing something. Then there's the stuff, hey, listen, we'll do some stuff and see if we can make it work in the marketplace and, keep the lights on. Anyway, guys, a lot to think about, really. There's a lot, mics are fascinating. Get into mics. Learning the sound of your room. Trying not to get too intimidated by someone telling you what the best practices are. Listen to it, take it. A lot of it is good advice, well-intentioned and good, okay? But none of it's the gospel either. And have some confidence in your ability to hear things. And if you don't have a sense of taste, great. Go keep listening to enough music till you do develop your own sense of, I want this. I know what I want to hear. Go after that thing and do that. And you'll make some good stuff, man. So, a lot on one's mind. I'm going to be playing with mics and playing with my horns and getting where I want to get to. And for you guys, I'll get back in touch with you again before the holidays. We'll talk more. There's been a few things happening that have been very cool that make me not as cynical. This is nice. There are moments where human beings being human beings. And I will talk to you guys, soon. But hey, listen, if any of this is interesting to you, get a hold of me. Let me know what you think. Talk to you, cats.